Welcome back to Tech Yes City, and this is the Doc finally coming back to you guys on the AMD platforms with an overclocking tutorial. Now today I'm going to be going over a 4.2 gig overclock and a 4.4 gig overclock. And this is for all the people on the FX-6300s or the FX-8320s or 8350s as well. And first of all, let's get on with it anyway. So I'm going to be going over a lot of things, but I'm going to be keeping it as simple as possible as well. So the first two programs you're going to need, I recommend getting, is AIDA64 Extreme and Prime 95. Now AIDA64 you do get a, it's a 30-day trial, but that is honestly more than enough for finding a stable overclock. And Prime 95, it's optional, you actually don't need it, but I always like it because it takes the temperatures higher than AIDA64 does. However, be careful with this, some people don't recommend it on AMD platforms. And then another optional program here is Heroes of New Earth, which I find works great on both Intel and AMDs for finding unstable overclocks really quickly. And the good thing about this is the game won't crash. Only the game will crash, not your whole Windows setup. So anyway, let's move on now. I'll put the download link of these three programs in the description below for you guys, so feel free to check them out. Anyway, let's restart the computer and let's go into BIOS. Now, something important to remember is that this is an MSI motherboard. So if you've got an Asus motherboard, a Gigabyte motherboard, or an ASRock motherboard, there may be different names for things, there may be different settings. So as soon as your computer boots up, you want to press delete. I also recommend knowing how to reset your CMOS. That's an important feature. On this motherboard, it does have a clear CMOS button, so you can just turn off your computer, hit that button, and it'll reset all your defaults back to normal if you come into a bad overclock. So let's move on now. So this is the motherboard. I recommend putting it on standard. That's just got all the options there. And this is if you're on MSI. Now update to the latest BIOS if you haven't already. And basically I want you to go into overclock. So this is important. And today we're not going to be touching CPU FSB frequency, or we're not going to be touching RAM speeds, because I think those two settings are for each other. I honestly only found a performance difference when I overclocked the FSB speeds and it increased my RAM speeds. So RAM speeds are pretty important for AMD, and I mean, I will quickly show you at the end of the tutorial what my custom RAM speeds are for this rig, but it's pretty simple and it's not hard to do. But anyway, today we're going to be focusing on the adjust CPU ratio, and we're going to be focusing on adjust the CPU north bridge ratio, and also the hyperthread link speed. So these three settings here are important, and they've also got three voltages that are relative to them. This is the CPU voltage, the CPU north bridge voltage, and the north bridge voltage. I'll also be talking about what settings to disable and what settings you can keep on, and what settings are optimal for gaming. Also, I highly recommend that you have an aftermarket CPU cooler if you're going to overclock, and you also have a decent motherboard. This is a mid-range motherboard. It's the 990 FX GD65 from MSI, and actually if you're on another motherboard manufacturer and it's a mid-range or a high-end board, you can pretty much copy my settings today and I'm pretty sure your overclock will work. And that's because, I'll get onto that later, but mainly it's because the MSI don't have a V-droop function on this motherboard, and that essentially is when the CPU is under load, the voltage drops down, and there's no function to accommodate that and up the voltage when that happens. This motherboard doesn't feature that, which is one negative, one big negative of this motherboard. But anyway, let's move on now. So today we're going to be going for a 4.2 gig overclock. And now you want to use your numpad, and we're going to go to 4.2 here, and then we're going to adjust. Now this is important. So 4.2 is a nice overclock. I'm pretty sure that anyone on an FX-8320 will be able to obtain this overclock. I haven't heard of someone not being able to obtain a 4.2 gig overclock on a decent motherboard with a decent CPU cooler. This should be obtainable on anyone's rig. Let's look at the CPU north bridge ratio. Now, even though 2200 megahertz is fine, when I was doing my testing, I found that putting this to 2400 megahertz made a difference in games. So especially Skyrim, which was one of the most CPU intensive benchmarks I did. So putting this to 12 made a difference of 3%, 2 to 3% in frame rates. So I recommend putting this to 12 if you can. If your overclock's unstable, you may wish to dial this back down to 2200 megahertz, but that's up to you. I do recommend putting it to 2400, however. CPU core control, we can leave that alone. That's if you want to disable cores manually, you can do that. AMD Turbo Core technology. Now, I want to disable this because pretty much when my CPU's under load, I want it going to 4.2 gigs. And when it's not on load, I want it clocking all the way down to 1400 megahertz. So you want to disable this and put in, I'll show you the other features that you can put in later to accommodate for this. DRAM frequency, I put this to 1866 and I'll show you at the end of the video, but if you want to overclock your RAM, I've got a RAM overclocking tutorial. Honestly, RAM overclocking is pretty much identical on the Intels and AMDs, so I'll put my RAM overclocking tutorial in the link below, as I've already spent a lot of time doing RAM overclocking tutorials, and it honestly takes a good 40 minutes, which I keep away. Honestly, quick and dirty. If you've got XMP profiles, you can just enable them. Enable your best profile there, your highest speeds, and that'll should give you a performance bump over the auto settings anyway. Let's move on now to DRAM timing. I like to put that on link anyway, and I'll be overclocking my memory later at the end of the video, just quickly showing you my settings. But let's move on now to the hyperthread link speed. This I found, having this at 2600 was absolutely fine. It doesn't go any higher anyway on this motherboard. So you want to put this to 2600. Putting it down to 2400 actually didn't make a difference, but I like to leave it as high as it can go. So hyperlink control, we don't have to touch that. There's settings that I think it's like 8-bit and 16-bit. You don't have to bother touching them. Leaving them on auto is absolutely fine. Now CPU voltage, this is the most important feature because every single chip out there is going to behave differently. Every single chip is going to need a different optimum voltage to run at. I mean, well, some chips can run at lower voltage on the same clocks than other chips. For instance, you could have a chip that could run at 4.6 gig at only 1.38 volts. You could be that lucky guy. For me, personally, I found that my chip at 4.2 gigs runs at 1.4 volt. However, keep in mind, with the V droop on this CPU, it does drop down to about 1.37 volts, and I'll show you that later in the stability testing. So having this at 1.4 volt isn't not much to worry about. MSI on their motherboards actually have a limit, actually have a safe limit threshold. So if you go over 1.45 volt, your computer just won't simply boot. So keep that in mind. I would say 1.45 volt is also pretty much the safe limit for 24/7 overclocks. You wouldn't really want to go over that anyway, so it's not much of a disadvantage of having an MSI board, but the V droop that is one thing that does annoy me, because honestly, if your CPU can run at 4.4 gigs and it takes 1.44 volt under load, then you won't be able to get that on this motherboard because it can't go up to 1.48 volt, which I would be perfectly happy running with. I am happy, I'll talk about it later, but I am lucky to have a motherboard that runs at 1.44.9 and V droops down to about 1.42 volt at 4.4. So I'm lucky that my chip does just cut the limit at 4.4, but some people might not be as lucky. I mean, some people might be even luckier. So this is all a silicon lottery, and I'm spending a lot of time talking about this because it's important to note that every chip on this CPU voltage setting is going to need different CPU voltages. Some are going to be better, some are going to be worse. However, 4.2 gigs, I imagine everyone should be able to just dial in this CPU voltage setting and they should be good to go. Let's talk about this CPU Northbridge voltage. Now, honestly, you can just put this to 1.2 and leave it. That's pretty much for any overclock up to 4.2 gigs or up to 4.4. Putting this to 1.2 should be absolutely fine. Also, this one here, I like to put this to 1.15 volt as it runs pretty, everything runs pretty cool. My motherboard doesn't get hot at all. and I like to give, this is pretty much safe settings. You don't have to worry about anything burning out or, when you're overclocking 4.4, at least you'll know if you put these to these limits, you'll know that they're not limiting you in any way. So having this at 1.2 and 1.15 is absolutely fine. That's not a problem at all. Let's move now down to the extra features because it is important. You've also got overclocking profiles here, which we'll save after we've confirmed that our overclocks are stable. But let's move now down to CPU features. Okay, AMD Cool and Quiet. We do want this enabled. Essentially, when I was benchmarking, I did disable it. However, for general usage, you're gonna want this enabled. So when you're gaming, your CPU will ramp up. When you're on the desktop, maybe just browsing the internet, your CPU will ramp down in speeds, which will save you power. It'll save your CPU heat as well. Won't be putting out as much heat, so it's actually a good feature. C1E, this is mainly for, I like to use this on the Intels. I don't like to use this on the AMDs, so keep that in mind. The SVM mode, I disabled that. I think it's a server feature. Same with the IOMMU mode. Core 6 C6 state, if you want your computer to be able to hibernate, then I recommend leaving this enabled. So excuse the voices in the background. Someone's just, yeah, that'll probably happen a little bit throughout this tutorial, but Core C6 state, we want this disabled, and HPC mode, we want this enabled. This is AMD's pretty much, HPC mode is AMD's version of C1E, basically. So this is the setting that'll ramp down your CPU to 1 volt when it's not in use. So it's actually really good and I recommend it. Core C6 state, you can have this, again, you have this enabled if you want your computer to hibernate or sleep. I generally don't bother. I don't, if I'm not using my computer for long times, I turn it off anyway. So it's up to you guys, but I'll disable it. Okay, so now with those settings, we are good to go. We're ready to boot into Windows and start our stress testing. You can save this if you want to, but since it's not stable for me yet, actually I will save it. I will save it because if it crashes after say 5 or 10 minutes, I can then come back to this and quickly load it up and then just tweak the CPU voltage a little bit. So we'll go here, we'll set the name and we'll call it 4.2 test. And then we'll save the overclocking profile to overclocking profile 1. Okay, so let's reboot this now and go into Windows and start stress testing. That's what we're gonna start doing now. So let's get on with it. So as you guys know, with all my overclocking tutorials, I like to do them uncut, just to basically, you know, show you that these are legit settings and they're working, everything's working perfectly fine. Because I know, and again, I know there's gonna be people out there who are gonna get frustrated and they're not gonna be able to obtain a certain overclock. But just when you take your time, and honestly, I recommend watching this whole tutorial, and if you need help, put a comment in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So now that we're in Windows, we've seen it's booted up absolutely fine. If your computer does not boot up, then you may need to give it more voltage, or you may not have your CPU cooler adequately placed. So anyway, let's move on now to sensor. So we want to go down to sensor here. So we open IDA64 up, we go down to sensor, and it will display your CPU. This is the one I want you guys to focus on. Also keep in mind your motherboard as well. The CPU Core 1, I believe these readings are faulty. They're not actually right. As you see there, it went down, it's going down to 12 degrees. I'm telling you now, the ambient temperatures in here are pretty much, I think they're somewhere from 15 to 20 degrees. I don't have an ambient temperature checker, so I can't tell you guys exactly what the ambient temperatures are in here, but I definitely tell you that these readings aren't correct. I mean, there's no way it's 8 degrees. And so this is the one you want to focus on, 32 degrees and 24 degrees. These two seem about accurate, and you don't want to take it too much over that. So anyway, with that being said, let's move on now. We'll open up a thing called CPU-Z. So IDA has its own CPU-Z, and I find it's absolutely fine. And then we want to open up the stress test as well, the system stability test. Now you can use Prime if you want to, but as I said before, some people say don't recommend it on AMDs. I mean, I found it fine. It's a stability test. If it can't run it, then your computer's not stable, right? So anyway, let's do this. Let's start it now. And you can see here it's clocking up to 4.2 gigs. You want to just leave all these settings ticked as well. Stress the CPU, stress the floating point units, stress the cache, stress the system memory. I mean, you want to stress it all at the same time. And see here we're going up to 37 degrees, which, I mean, it's about what? I mean, if I had to guess what the exact ambient temperatures were in here, I'd say it'd be about 18 degrees. So at the moment we're running about 19 degrees over delta, which is absolutely fine. I mean, this overclock will be fine for the summer as well. I'd have no problems running this overclock in the summer. And also the elapsed time. So we'll run this for about 2 minutes. Honestly, I recommend running it for a good 10 minutes at least, and then you can start moving into games, preferably Heroes of New Earth. Like I said before, I recommend this game. It'll quickly find an unstable overclock. You may wish to render a video as well. That's also another great way, a real world test to see if your CPU is actually 100% stable. So with stress tests, my main concern is just quickly testing if the overclock is near stable and testing that the temperatures don't go too high. So this is my main two concerns when I do my initial stress tests. Also, we can see here, as I said to you guys before, the V droop on this motherboard is actually pretty weird. And so even though I set in 1.4 volt, you can see it's going down to 1.37, I think 1.36 as well. I mean, there we go, it's going down. So the V droop on this motherboard is a little bit weird. I see why people sort of stay away from this motherboard, but honestly, it was a good value board. It was actually the only motherboard they had in stock. I got the Asus motherboard, but that unfortunately did not work properly. So I had to change, and I got this MSI motherboard, and it works fine. I mean, for a 4.4 gig overclock, it worked absolutely fine. So here it is here. So CPU is running pretty good. I mean, we're at 2 minutes. We'll take it up to 4.4 now. But if I was testing this 4.2 for myself, I'd be opening up Heroes of New Earth and then playing a few games and then maybe rendering a video. That's what I'd be doing. So, but this, I mean, honestly, this looks pretty good to go. The max temperatures there are 40 degrees, so not bad at all. We can stop that now. So yeah, again, I'd be trusting this here. I'd be trusting this one. I don't think this one's accurate. Maybe someone who's been a long time guru on AMD CPUs might want to comment on this, but I'd be trusting this CPU score over these scores. Just make sure that this, apparently AMD recommends not exceeding around about 60 degrees Celsius, so keep that in mind as well. Don't go over 60 degrees on these FX CPUs. Intel's, I mean, Intel's are pretty much good up to 90 degrees. I think you can even take them to 100 degrees. They're just different architectures. So with the AMD, you want to make sure you're not going over 60 degrees. Now that overclock is pretty much confirmed, we can restart our computer. Now, if your computer crashes, again, if it doesn't boot or if it crashes, then all you have to do is clear the CMOS. So you can do that via two methods. If your computer has a clear CMOS button, you can hit that, or you can use a clear CMOS jumper on your motherboard. It's up to you guys. So there actually is two ways to do it. There's a third way as well. That's the last method you should use, and that's just to take the power cord out of your power supply, turn your computer on, make sure all the power is drained, and then take the CMOS battery out as well. That'll reset your CMOS as well. So anyway, let's move on now. So we've done the 4.2 overclock, okay? So that, I mean, theoretically that's stable, right? I'm trying to save you guys a little bit of time. So we can say, okay, overclocking profile 1, set name, 4.2, I don't know what's going on here, 4.2 stable. There we go. So we got 4.2 stable, we can save that, and then we can go and begin our next overclock. So if we go here now, we want to go for a 4.4, and I mean, if you want to, I mean, the good thing is, right, if you're stable, if you do this the first time around and you are completely stable, you can maybe bump it down, maybe to a 1.38, because you ultimately want to find the lowest CPU voltage where your computer is stable, because that's going to save you a bit of power, it's going to save you a bit of heat, and also it's going to give you, if you're overclocking, give you the highest speeds. So you can do what I've done here, and you can, if it's completely stable the first time around, you can maybe bump it down 2, and if it's not stable, bump it back up 1, and find your sweet spot for your CPU. So this is what this guide's all about, is finding the best voltage that your CPU can run at. Now, sometimes as well, this is the next overclock we're going for. And now this is important to note. At 4.4 gigs, I believe I have heard, I mean, it's pretty rare, but I have heard of some FX-8320s and some FX-6300s not being able to run at 4.2 gigs. So you might want to go to maybe try a 4.3 gig overclock. But keep in mind that if you're an unlucky person and you lost the silicon lottery, you may not be able to get to 4.4. Like, you can give it as much voltage as you can. You can go to 1.45, and your computer just simply doesn't work. Like, it'll fail a stress test or it'll crash occasionally, and that just means that your CPU just can't, even though it can boot at those settings, it ultimately just can't run 24/7 stable at 4.4 gigs. And so that's when you can use the CPU FSB frequency to maybe tune out a 4.3 gig overclock or something like that. That's up to you. That's a little bit more advanced, but today I just want to show you guys the basics on how to get that extra 10%, 20% out of your processor, especially on the FX-8320, which base clock is only 3.5 gig. So as we see, if we can get up to 4.4, we're getting a significant increase in speeds. Anyway, let's move on now. So we're getting 4.4 gigs, 22 ratio. Again, keep these the same. Keep the Northbridge, CPU Northbridge frequency at 2400. Keep this at 13. So we're going to use the same settings as we did with the 4.2, but all we're changing this time is pretty much the CPU ratio to 4.4, and we're giving it more CPU voltage. That's all we are doing. If I go to 1.45, my computer just won't boot. That's MSI's hard limit. And so keep that in mind. I'm just showing you guys now, anyone should be able to obtain this 4.4 gig overclock. If you're unlucky, you may not be able to obtain this. So you can feel free to copy my settings. Again, we'll go down to the overclocking profiles and we'll save this as 4.4 test. So 4.4 test, and we'll save that, and then we will exit and we will test this overclock out. So that's let's move on now to the stress testing. This time around I will do Prime 95, as I'll show you guys that it does get a few degrees hotter on Prime than it does on IDA's system stability test. So that's something important to keep in mind. So yeah, I mean, again, 4.4 is a nice, I think it's a sweet spot on the FX-8320 with mid-range boards. Maybe if you've got a high-end motherboard, you may wish to go to 4.6. I hear 4.6 is what a lot of people run their FX-8350s at. So regardless, you know, you guys, I'm just teaching you guys the simple ropes, and you guys should be able to get at least something extra out of your CPUs. On a stock cooler, I mean, people ask me what can I get on a stock cooler. I don't know. I didn't, like, as soon as I got my FX-8320, I didn't even bother using the stock cooler because I just pretty much got this CPU for testing against the Intel. So let's move on now. So we're gonna get, again, we're gonna load up our CPU and we're gonna see the volt. We wanna check out this CPU temperature here. And you're probably wondering, oh, Brian, you know, in your Intel overclocks, you use real temp and Prime. And yes, that's because real temp only works on Intels. When I loaded up, I was surprised to learn that it didn't work on AMD rigs. And I was kind of like, okay, oh, that's cool. But anyway, so we load up the stability test here. We can load up CPU ID. And we'll just do 2 minutes of stress testing here. Again, okay, so we see here that our computer is running fine. After a little while, it should, I mean, if we close that down, it should clock down to, one thing about this is it should clock down to 1400 megahertz. So the multiplier should go down to 7 when the computer's not loaded up. So we'll test that out. I just want to show, yeah, there we go. So you can see there, when your computer's not in use, it'll bump down to 1400 megahertz and the multiplier will go down to 7. That's when it's not, when your computer's not doesn't have any load on it. So that's a good feature. You can see there the voltage drops down to 1 volt as well, which I recommend for if you're using this for a long time, if this is your main gaming rig. Anyway, we'll go back to sensors. We will get the stability test rocking, and let's start her up. So let's go hit start, and we shall see. 100% load. Oh yeah. So again, keep these 4 ticked. You don't have to stress your hard drives or your GPU. I'm not doing a max power consumption test here. I'm just doing CPU overclocking. So look, in this time around, it should go a little bit higher. I mean, I imagine the CPU should go to around about 30, I'd say 40 degrees. It should probably hit 40 degrees, maybe a 22-degree delta. That's what it hit when, I mean, it hit about a 20-degree delta when I was on my Strike X open air test bed. And that was, I think the cooling's a little bit better on that rig than it is on the Zalman Z3 Plus. Only slight, I mean, not that much better. It's not night and day, but it's a little bit better. Anyway, so we got here, I'd say we're going to reach a delta of about 22 degrees. If we did this for 10 minutes, it may go up to 41 degrees. And yeah, so just keep that on. So be mindful of your motherboard and your CPU temps, and make sure they don't go too high. This being pretty good, I mean, this CPU temp here being pretty good, I would honestly just, this will probably be good for summer as well. This overclock here should be good for summer. So anyway, that's that, guys. We're going to wait another 40 seconds quickly, and then we'll boot up Prime 95. And you can see here the V-droop's going down as low as 1.4 volts. So I think it usually sits around 1.42 volt in games. Okay. Oh, sorry, it's dry in here. Okay, so we'll wait for 2 minutes and we'll stop that. Oh God. I've got the plague. So we'll stop that, that was fine. We'll start up Prime now, and we'll run small FFTs. This is pretty much RAM not tested much, so we don't need to test RAM, we just basically want to test the CPU. Oh, sorry, terribly sorry about this cough. But we can see here that Prime actually loads up the CPU even heavier than IDA does. And so we can see here that this V-droop is actually pretty damn bad in Prime 95. So this may be why you want to run Prime 95 instead of instead of IDA, because it's a real intense CPU benchmark. So as we can see here, the temperatures are going now to 43, probably will go up to 44 degrees as well. So that's something you want to be mindful of. Honestly, I do like to use Prime, even though I've read that people don't recommend Prime for AMDs. I think it's absolutely fine. I'd actually recommend it to find out what that max CPU temp is going to go to. So you can see here, 44 degrees, it's good to go. So yeah, I mean, my CPU is pretty good at this setting. So maybe I'd try in the settings to tone it down a little bit, see what my CPU optimally can run 4.4 gig at, but that would be for me to test. You guys as well, you can find that out and test it. But I'll quickly show you guys now also, I'll quickly show you guys now my RAM overclocks as well. So, and anything that I may have missed, I will talk about it quickly. So if you guys have any questions as well, again, ask me and I'll reply as soon as I can. You know, if I don't see your comment, make sure you send me a PM and I'll help you out as well. So sorry about my voice as well. It's dry in here and I've got a bit of hay fever as well. Oh God, I missed the Del key. God, we'll restart that one. So anyway, let's do this again. So this is on an SSD at the moment as well. The computer's boots up really quickly. If you don't have an SSD, I do recommend getting one. So sorry, my computer, my DSLR actually overheated before I could actually get into show you guys the RAM speeds. So that being, I didn't even notice, like I did everything and then I was like, oh, what? My camera turned off. So as you can see, I've already dialed it all in, but I will show you what it's like on default. So here we go, default, 1333. Now that, honestly, for an AMD with a mid-range GPU, I would honestly be, especially like a GTX 670, I'd be pushing this to 1866 because in some CPU-bound games, I've found that if you tune your RAM, especially as opposed to auto, you can pick up almost, like even in Skyrim, you can pick up almost a 10% FPS increase. That's what I found with, I found that out in the past when I was actually testing RAM speed stock versus even just XMP profiles. So it's important to get your XMP profiles in even if you don't know how to overclock memory. But I'll quickly show you guys what my memory speed. This is a different memory to what I'm actually using in my main rig and what I did my testing on. So this RAM will behave a little bit differently to my main RAM. Ultimately though, I mean, it's standard. I think this stuff's a little bit worse too. So, I mean, I've got the timings in here, 2T, 9T, 10T, 9T, and I like to have the TRAS, as I've tested in the past, I like to have the TRAS relaxed a little bit. The sum of all these three plus 1 or 2 seems to be the best setting for the TRAS. Now, you guys are welcome to copy my RAM settings. Like, please, by all means, if you want to have a try at overclocking RAM, you can copy my settings here. And however, I will point out though, with DRAM voltage, so this is usually 1.5 volt, I do recommend not going over 1.65 volts. So honestly, keep it safe, don't go over that. Even 1.6 volt, around about 1.6 volt, I don't recommend going over, especially in summer. It's just one more component that may fail if your RAM gets, I've heard of people frying their RAM at 1.7 volts. So just be mindful of that. Honestly, 1.6 volt should be good though, it should be safe, definitely should be a safe level for any DDR3 memory. So again, that's, you guys are welcome to try my DDR3 settings. And I mean, this stuff that I'm using in this rig is actually not that good. It's got no heat sinks at all. It's like, even the XMP profile here is like 1600, 11, 1128, which is pretty much the worst RAM you can get. So this stuff here, I mean, the fact that it goes to DDR3 at, you know, 2, 9, 10, 9, 30, you guys should be able to copy those settings and the voltages, and your RAM should work. If it doesn't, then maybe give it a little bit more voltage, or maybe just put it back to 1600 and give 1600 a go. But you definitely don't want it on 1333. That's not that good in my opinion. So anyway, we'll give this a whirl. We'll save this. We'll save this in overclocking profiles as our final, or whatever we can set name for it. 4.4 gigs, final sweet OC, and we can save that, and we can then jump into Windows, and we are good to go. So yeah, I'm gonna close out this video by saying, if you guys have any questions at all about this CPU overclocking tutorial, then please leave a comment in the comment section below. If I don't get back to you and it's urgent, then send me a PM as well and I'll get back to you as well. So yeah, definitely. Okay, this yeah, I think this RAM isn't even stable at 1.6 volt. Okay, so I'm glad you guys could see this, because pretty much what I do if something like this happens, I just hold my power button down. I then, what I'll do now is I'll then hit my clear CMOS button at the back, turn it back on, and the computer should work absolutely fine. I mean, so yeah, there we go. Make sure we hit that delete key. I'm actually glad you guys could see this. It just, what happens is that, yeah, it doesn't, the RAM obviously, the RAM here wasn't stable at 1.6 volt, which was surprising. So we can put all our CPU, we put our CPU ratio back to, I mean, or we can just, this is the good thing about overclocking profiles, right? You can just load your overclocking profile, and we had it here. Sorry, there's that nasty plague coming back again. And we can give it a bit more voltage. I mean, maybe 1.61 volt. You know, give it a little bit extra voltage, and just make sure that, I'm gonna make sure that XMP was disabled as well. Okay, yep, disabled. Okay, so let's try this now. I mean, it should work. Okay, save configuration. We're giving the RAM a little bit more voltage, and hopefully it runs. Might have to relax the timings a little bit too. But no, there it is. So the RAM, obviously it wanted a little bit more voltage than 1.6. Yeah, start Windows normally. It wanted a little bit more voltage than 1.6, and I gave it that, and it was all good to go. So there we go. That's my rig, guys. So that's stable at 4.4 gigs. And so yeah, if you have any questions, please leave a comment in the comment section below. And I really look forward to your feedback. If you enjoyed this video and if it helped you get some extra speeds out of your AMD, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Tech Yes City, and I'll be coming back to you guys with some more tech vids. Sorry, the video quality isn't the best. I'm using my my DSLR, mirrorless DSLR, and I'm pretty much recording just, you know, from the desk with the camera facing the TV. So, I mean, if I could get a HDMI capture card with an output, input, I would get one, but you know, it's like $200, and I don't do many tutorials like this. Usually most of my tutorials are on the desktop, where I can use Camtasia, or I can use Shadow Play, you know, so for games. So yeah, these are sort of like, I don't do a lot of these overclocking tutorials, and so I can't justify, you know, I'm a small tech channel, I don't have a lot of money, I can't really justify spending $200 on a HDMI capture card just for a little bit of better video quality on some of my overclocking tutorials. But again, I apologize for the video quality not being as good as some other tutorials out there, but I hope the content was good, and that's the main thing I want to keep giving you guys at Tech Yes City. Anyway, I want to hear your feedback, and peace out for now. Bye.